Foundation. They were the first outlet to pick up my syndicated column. I do have a fourth book before Bullies. That was Primetime Propaganda, How the Left Culture of Fear and Intimidation Silences America. I spoke here at Heritage for that, too. I'm also the editor-at-large of Breitbart News, and I host a radio locally in Los Angeles. So if you're bored or if you have an iPad, then you can tune in at KRLA870.com, 6 to 9 in the morning, Pacific time, 9 to noon here. I want to start off by talking a little bit about Andrew Breitbart. I am the editor-at-large there. Andrew was a mentor of mine. I met Andrew when I was 17 years old. He had just seen a column that I wrote for the UCLA Daily Bruin, and as he was wont to do, he was sitting in like a greasy taco joint in Westwood, read the Daily Bruin, saw the column, and then promptly emailed me. At the time, Andrew was just the secret other half of the Drudge Report. And we got together, we became fast friends. And one of the things that Andrew and I used to talk about a lot, because we knew each other for over a decade before his untimely death, was he used to talk a lot about how the left were a bunch of bullies. How what the left really does is try to shut down the debate, how their sole goal is to avoid a solid policy discussion by trying to label us bad human beings, racist, sexist, bigot, homophobes. And as Andrew's career went on, I saw it happen to him personally. They obviously did that to Andrew. They tried to demonize him as kind of a wild man, right-winger, a crazy person with fire coming out of his ears. Andrew was one of the most genial people I ever met. I don't know how many of you met Andrew. I'm sure some of you did, because when Andrew died, there were probably 100 million people mourning him, and 95 million of them had at one point met or spent time or had lunch with Andrew, because that's who he was. But his main message is that the main message of his life is that we have to fight the bullies, and that's what being a conservative means, is fighting bullies. The more I got to look into his message, the more I realized how right that was, and that's why I wrote Bullies. In the last few years, the left has decided that the political debate is worthless. They are not going to debate policy. They are not going to debate what is the best way to solve the nation's problems. They are not going to provide evidence. They are going to label us morally deficient human beings unworthy of debate. We see it in virtually every arena of American life. In the last week alone, we saw it from Colin Powell, we saw it from Brian Williams, and we saw it from President Obama himself. Colin Powell went on the Sunday shows and talked about the so-called dark vein of intolerance that was running throughout the Republican Party. Now, what evidence did he provide for that assertion? That we're not left-wing, that we don't believe in anthropogenic climate change, or that we don't believe that there should be redistribution of wealth, or that we don't believe in Obamacare. And if we would just move to the left, suddenly that would make us not racist. Now, Colin Powell, above all, should know how not racist our party is, considering so many in our party were considering supporting him despite his liberalism in 1996 for a presidential run. And he was Secretary of State under President Bush, obviously. This is somebody who's treated very well by the Republican Party. But that didn't stop him anyway, because now Colin Powell is on the left, and that means that we are the bad guys. President Obama did it in his inaugural address just last week also. He said, there was a peculiar line in his speech where he said that absolutism is not principle, and he said that name-calling is not discussion. He then proceeded to spend the rest of his speech name-calling and avoiding principle and being an absolutist. He suggested that essentially, if you disagree with him, you want people in their twilight years to live in poverty. You want parents of disabled kids to have no recourse. You want the poor to suffer. You want black people to stand in line to vote. You want gay people to be treated unequally, and you want women to be paid less than men. He actually said all of those things in the speech, and that was clearly the undertone of his speech. Just yesterday, Dianne Feinstein gets up, and she leads off her, whatever it was, her press conference. She leads it off with a pastor saying that if you're a good Christian, you have to be for gun control. If you're a good person, you have to be for gun control, because otherwise you don't care that kids are getting killed all around the country in schools and churches and places like Sandy Hook. This is what the left now stands for. And there are several different kinds of bullies that it's worth pointing out. I'm really going to divide this into two sections. The first is I'm going to discuss what it is that we face, and the other part of it is how we fight this, because it is an overwhelming attempt by the left to silence the debate, to shut us out from the debate, and to cow people into being quiet, because it's much easier to go about your daily business not being called a racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe who hates every minority. To begin, there are the institutional bullies. Now, the right has lost a lot of the institutions. Most of my books are about institutions, the university system or Hollywood or the media. The reason that the right has lost is because we think individually and the left thinks institutionally. We like to debate people on a one-on-one level. We'll go door to door. We'll talk to anybody. We'll have a discussion with people on that individual level. Whenever you see somebody getting sucked into a Facebook conversation with a leftist friend who's never going to be convinced, it's always a conservative. You don't see leftists getting sucked into these conversations because leftists are too busy taking over the media. The left thinks institutionally. The left wants a top-down dictation of policy. They understand something that we don't. Because they think institutionally, because we don't think in terms of top-down control, and the left is fond of doing so, they think in terms of, instead of let's debate one-on-one, we'll take over the university system, and then we'll use it as a club to leverage millions of young people to believe that right-wingers are bad human beings. Or we'll take over Hollywood, and then we will force everybody who is mildly conservative out of Hollywood in order to leverage our points of view down the throats of the American people. They do it with regard to nonprofits, too. They combine with the government. Look at what President Obama just did in shifting his campaign into a 501c4 lobbying group. He also opened the door, by the way, in an executive order to actually funding that lobbying group from the government. President Obama is somebody who really understands the battle. He understands the fight. He's very, very smart. And he understands that he can use outside institutions like Media Matters. He can use outside institutions like Organizing for Action, what was Obama for America. He can use those institutions to push positions he cannot do as President of the United States. He combines with those institutions to push forward that agenda and to silence people and to launch boycotts and secondary boycotts against anybody who disagrees. We now live in a country where if you abide by the basic laws of economics, you are an enemy of this administration. If you are Phil Mickelson and you say, the taxes in California are too high, I'm leaving, then you are told that you are somehow a bad person. There's something wrong with you. Now, there are a lot of people who have left California because the taxes are too high. I'm paying those high taxes. I think every day about whether to leave California because of the tax rate. That's because economics exist. The left doesn't think they do. So when Wendy says, Obamacare is going to cost money, perhaps we'll have to cut back hours, and the left responds with, if you do that, we'll boycott you. That is not a logical, coherent economic argument. That is an argument that if you disagree with the effects even of what Obama's policies do, with what leftist policies do, then there's something wrong with you. You made a moral decision to cut back those hours, not an economic decision to cut back those hours. Leaving aside the institutional bullies for a second, there are several types of bullying that the left loves to engage in. Their favorite, of course, is racial bullying. They love it. It's their favorite thing. The reason for that is that the left's philosophy is based almost solely and completely at this point on the idea that they stand up for victimized groups. Everything they do is to stand up on behalf of some victimized minority. Blacks, Jews, gays, women, doesn't matter. If you're a minority, they're standing up for you. What that means is that if we oppose their policies, by necessity, the logic is, we hate blacks, gays, Jews, and women. And that is sort of the philosophy that they trot out. It also means that they treat people who are apostates as though there's something wrong with them. They're not. If you're Jewish and you're a conservative, as I am, you're not a real Jew, because that gives the lie to their entire agenda. If it turns out that not all Jews agree with them, then how can they claim to be standing up for all of these victimized minorities? If Larry Elder is a black man and disagrees with them, then it's because he's not a good black man. He's not good at being a black man. He's betrayed his race. That is the philosophy of the left when it comes to race. Now, what they do, the tactics are really what's interesting here. We all know that they use the term racism far too often. They label things racist that are not even close to racist. Voter ID, not racist. But the left says that you're a racist if you think that maybe, just maybe, they should check the name on the voter form with your ID to make sure that you're not voting for Eric Holder, right? I mean, they think that is a racist thing. What they love to do, their favorite tactic, though, is to take a single flashpoint incident, use the media to blow this up into like the biggest thing that ever happened in the history of humanity, imply that all of America is based on the same racism that caused this incident, and then say, and the solution to that racism is liberalism. Now, one of the best examples we saw of that was last year in the George Zimmerman case. Right? The George Zimmerman case was the greatest case of media malpractice, I think, in American history. I mean, the only one that would even come close is Walter Duranty trying to cover up genocide in the Ukraine. But the attempt by the media, a very clear attempt to frame George Zimmerman, really frame him, was obvious, and it was politically motivated. It was obvious what they were trying to do. What actually happened in the George Zimmerman case is a Hispanic man was trailing a black man that he thought was engaged in possible criminal or suspicious behavior. He called 911. He got out of his car. When he turned around and went back to his car, he was confronted by the black man, who proceeded to pound this man's head into the ground until he shot him. That is what actually happened. Every police investigation has shown that is what happened. There is nothing to contradict George Zimmerman's account of events. There is not one shred of evidence